Rain beat down in fat, hissing drops as the preacher's voice fought the wind. The third coffin lowered into the muddy earth, its plain pine boards already soaking through. No one wept. Not for the man in the ground. Not for the woman standing alone in black. A cluster of townsfolk watched from a distance, boots deep in the mud, whispering things they didn't have the guts to say aloud. 3 husbands. All dead within a week. Bad luck don't stretch that far. She's cursed. Maybe worse. She didn't flinch. Didn't glance their way. She stood straight as a fence post, arms folded tight, hat low over her brow. The hem of her dress clung to her shins, soaked and heavy. Her gaze fixed on the grave, eyes dry, unreadable. The preacher cleared his throat, muttered a final amen and stepped back, eager to be gone. By sundown the cemetery was empty. All but her. She knelt by the grave and pressed her hand to the fresh earth, murmuring something no one else could hear. Then she stood, turned, and walked the road home, alone. The path to her land wound through twisted cottonwoods and brittle grass. Her cabin stood at the edge of town, where the prairie began to forget the shape of fences. Shutters hung crooked. A rusted weather vane spun slow circles above. The garden had gone to weeds, the barn leaned like it was ready to fall, and the pasture held nothing but dust and ghosts. Children said she spoke to spirits. That wolves wouldn't cross her land. Some claimed to see strange lights in her windows at night. The townsfolk avoided her during the day and locked their doors at sundown. Her name was spat out like a curse, though few remembered what it even was. But they remembered her face. Pale, sure. Eyes too dark. Hair like crow's wings. A mouth that never smiled. And they remembered the men. First came the blacksmith's eldest son, broad-shouldered and full of charm. Married her on a Saturday. Dead by Thursday, crushed beneath his own forged beam. Second was a trapper from Montana, clever with his hands and quick with a drink. Dead in 6 days, found frozen in the hills though it was summer. The third, a traveling preacher who said he didn't believe in curses. They buried him 7 days later, lungs filled with smoke after his tent caught fire on windless ground. After that, no one asked her name. They called her the widow, the witch, bad luck bride. And every child in town learned not to look her in the eye. But she remembered every one of them. Every promise, every kiss, every breath. And she carried their deaths like stones in her coat. That night, lightning danced on the horizon, silent and far off. She sat at the table inside her one-room home, oil lamp burning low, sipping bitter tea and staring at nothing. On the shelf above her bed sat 3 items: a broken horseshoe, a silver ring, and a charred book of hymns. She never touched them. Just kept them there like offerings to whatever god still listened. A knock came at the door. Sure. Unexpected. She didn't move at first. No one knocked. Not anymore. Another knock. Then a voice. Low, tired. I hear you're hirin'. She opened the door slow, hand close to the knife at her waist. Rain dripped from the brim of her hat as she looked out at the man on her porch. He was tall but not young. Face like sun-baked leather, eyes the color of ash, one arm held awkward like it pained him. His boots were caked in dust, coat threadbare, hat crushed in his hands. Name's not important, he said. I need work. And I ain't picky. She stared a long time. They told you whose land this was? He gave a tired shrug. Said it was cursed. Figured bad luck's better than no luck. She considered him. Something about his voice didn't carry fear. Not defiance either. Just a kind of worn-out grit, like a man with nothing left to lose. You good with animals? She asked. Cows don't argue with me. Can you fix a roof? Better than I fix myself. She stepped back. Left the door open. Start tomorrow. He hesitated, then nodded once and turned. I'll be here at dawn. Bring your own food. He paused. You planning to kill me? Best do it on a full stomach. She shut the door in his face. But when she sat back down, the tea didn't taste so bitter. The next morning he showed up before sunrise. Tools slung over one shoulder, a small sack in the other. She pointed to the barn without a word. He got to work. They didn't talk much. He patched the holes in her roof while she chopped wood. Fixed a gate hinge while she hauled water. Each task done without fuss or flair, just quiet labor under the hot western sun. She noticed the way he moved, careful, deliberate, favoring his left side. He noticed the way she watched everything like waiting for something to go wrong. At midday he sat on the porch, drinking from his canteen. She brought him a piece of cornbread and left it beside him without a word. He nodded his thanks. They sat in silence for a while, watching the wind chase dust across the prairie. You married? He asked finally. She didn't answer right away. 3 times. Guess that means no. She gave him a look. Not cruel, just tired. They died. Each within a week. He nodded. Town said that part. Didn't say how. Doesn't matter. Maybe it does to them. She turned her eyes back to the horizon. You believe in curses? I believe in bad things happening to good people. Over and over. Long enough, folks start needing a reason. She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. That night, he slept in the hayloft. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind and wondering why the silence felt heavier now that someone else was on her land. Days passed. He fixed fences, cleared the garden, mucked the stalls. Never complained, never pried. Just worked. She found herself cooking a little extra, setting aside scraps without thinking. Sometimes she'd catch him humming a tune while he hammered nails, off-key and low. The town noticed. At the saloon, whispers turned to sneers. Fool thinks he's different. He'll be 6 feet under by Saturday. Maybe she likes burying them. The sheriff, a grim man with sharp eyes and a badge that hadn't seen polish in years, stopped him outside the general store. She's poison, son. You do better in the desert. I've been in the desert, the rancher replied. Sans worse company. That night, someone threw a rock through her window. She picked up the shards in silence. He patched the glass the next morning, jaw tight. I can leave, he said without looking at her. You'll be dead in a week. Maybe. But I'd rather die fixin' something than rot in a town full of cowards. For the first time she smiled. It wasn't much. Just a flicker. But it was real. They didn't talk about her husbands again. Not yet. But each day the distance between them shrank. Not with words. With work. With silence shared without discomfort. With the understanding that two broken things don't always make a whole, but sometimes they fit together just enough to hold. One evening he stood at the edge of the field, watching the horizon bleed orange and red. You ever think about leaving? He asked. All the time. Why don't you? She looked at the land. The crooked barn, the lopsided fence. The graves. This is where they died. I owe them more than silence. He didn't argue. Just nodded and watched the sun disappear behind the hills. Later that night, a chill wind swept through the house. She lit a lantern, checked the locks, made her rounds. In the mirror, she caught her own reflection, and something behind her. A flicker of shadow. A shape where no shape should be. She spun. Nothing. Just the wind outside, rattling the shutters. But her hand shook when she turned the lamp back down. And outside, in the dark beyond the pasture, something watched the house. Quiet. Patient. Waiting. By morning, the wind had calmed. The stranger was still alive. The roof didn't leak. And for the first time in a long time, the widow wasn't entirely alone. But the prairie doesn't forget. And neither do the dead. The sun rose hard and white the next morning, its glare baking the dirt yard before breakfast. The rancher was already up, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands black with oil from the pump he'd taken apart. The widow stood in the doorway, sipping from a tin cup, watching him work like she wasn't sure if she should stop him or hand him more tools. I tightened the belt, he said without looking up. Might hold. Might not. It's more than I managed in a year. He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat and grease from his face with the back of his hand. Things break when you leave him alone too long. Her gaze lingered on him. You talking about the pump? He glanced up, held her stare a moment. Sure. For a time that was enough. They worked the land like it might give up something besides dust. She showed him where the well used to run clear, where the coyotes had dug under the fence, and the stretch of prairie where nothing would grow no matter how deep you tilled. He didn't ask questions. Just listened, nodded, then got to digging. By the end of the week, the ranch looked a shade less haunted. The door hung straight. The chickens returned to roost. She caught herself humming once, low and tuneless, and stopped mid-note like it surprised her. The townsfolk weren't blind to it. At the mercantile, the air thickened when she stepped inside. People stopped talking. The clerk took her money with 2 fingers like he was afraid her touch might burn him. She kept her eyes forward, ignored the whispers, but the weight followed her out the door like smoke. Later that afternoon, she found a dead crow nailed to her fence post. Its wings were spread, eyes pecked out, dried blood streaking its black feathers. She didn't flinch. Just pulled it down and buried it under a flat stone near the garden. He found her afterward, dirt still under her nails. Was it a message? Always is. Want me to go into town, ask who left it? No. Why not? She looked at him like he'd asked why water was wet. Because I already know. Doesn't matter which hands did it. The town hates what it doesn't understand. They need me to stay strange. Safer that way. He rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable. And you're all right letting them think you're whatever it is they think you are? She turned back to the soil. They're wrong. But they're not far off. He didn't push further. Not yet. That night she dreamed of fire. Of men screaming her name as they burned. Of hands clawing at her dress, begging for breath. She woke covered in sweat, heart hammering like a gunshot. The shadows in the room seemed to lean closer than they should have. The air was too still. She got up, pulled on her coat, and walked into the yard barefoot, letting the cold bite her. Stars spun overhead, dizzying in their silence. She stood like that a long time, until she felt the presence behind her. I thought I saw someone moving, the rancher said from the porch, voice low. You didn't. He stepped down beside her. You always walk around like this at night? Only when I need reminding I'm real. He looked at her, studying the faint tremble in her hands. You believe in ghosts? She didn't answer right away. I believe in memories. The kind that crawl under your skin and won't come out. He nodded. Memories can be louder than gunshots. They stood there until the wind picked up again, cold and sharp. She didn't go back inside until the sky started to pale. The next morning brought trouble. A boy from town, no more than 14, came riding hard up the path, dust cloud trailing behind him. He didn't dismount. Just shouted, Sheriff says you're needed. Istridge. Cattle dead. Something ain't right. The widow's eyes narrowed. How many? Whole herd, ma'am. Sheriff wants you to see it. Why? The boy swallowed. Says it smells like you're kind of bad. She mounted her mare in silence. The rancher saddled up behind her. They rode fast. The wind kicked dust in their eyes, the horses' hooves pounding like warning drums across the dry earth. When they crested the ridge, the smell hit them first, sweet and rotting, thick enough to taste. Below lay a meadow full of corpses. Cattle. Dozens. All sprawled unnaturally, legs twisted, eyes wide and cracked with flies. No wounds. No tracks. Just death. The sheriff stood with his hat low, chewing a splinter of wood. You seen anything like it? The widow dismounted slow. Not in a long time. He gave her a sideways glance. Means you have seen it. She walked among the bodies, stooping to examine one. His tongue was black. Flies avoided it. She stood, wiped her hands on her skirt. Poison didn't do this. Then what did? She met his gaze. Something old. The rancher stepped forward. Old like what? She didn't answer him. Not in front of the sheriff. He looked from one to the other. You gonna tell us the truth or let more die? I don't owe this town the truth, she said, voice even. They decided long ago I was the problem. Let them live with it. The sheriff's eyes went hard. You keep holding on to secrets, someone else is gonna hang for this. She turned her back on him and walked to her horse. Then let's hope it's someone you like less. They rode home in silence. The rancher watched her hands tight on the reins, the way her jaw flexed. Tell me what you saw, he said once they were alone. I saw death with no reason. No logic. Just taken. Why call you? Because bad things follow me. And maybe they think I'm calling them. Are you? She pulled the horse up short and turned on him. Do I look like someone who wants more blood on their hands? No. But you look like someone who's used to it. Her shoulders dropped just a little. I've stopped praying it ends. I haven't. He reached forward, gently touched her wrist. She didn't pull away. For the first time, her eyes softened. That night, a storm rolled in from the west. Lightning without thunder, sky lit up like a lantern swinging wildly in the dark. The ranch creaked in the wind. Doors rattled. The air stank of iron and old earth. He couldn't sleep. Neither could she. He found her sitting by the fireplace, the flame barely more than a glow. In her lap sat a leather-bound book, cracked at the spine. She ran her fingers across the pages like they might vanish if she blinked. What is it? He asked. Journal. My mother's. He sat across from her, waiting. She was different too. Heard things. Saw signs. Folks whispered then, same as now. She said the land remembers blood. That sometimes it wants more. Superstition? She called it balance. He leaned forward. You think the land's hungry again? I think it never stopped. Pause. Then, and you? She shut the book. I'm the coin it uses to buy peace. He didn't know what to say to that. So he reached out, took her hand in his. You don't have to pay alone. She looked at him like no one had ever said that before. And maybe they hadn't. Outside, the wind screamed louder. Inside, two people sat close, surrounded by ghosts, clinging to warmth that hadn't quite died out yet. But far off, where the land split open in jagged cracks and old bones whispered in the dirt, something had begun to move. Something with no face, no name, only hunger. And it had finally caught her scent. The wind didn't let up for 3 days. It howled through the cracks in the walls, twisted around the chimney like a scream stuck in a loop. Dust crept into every crevice of the house, coating the floor, the dishes, their throats. The sky turned a permanent shade of bruised gold, and animals went silent. Even the coyotes had the sense to stay away. She moved through it all with practiced calm, doors latched, food rationed, eyes sharp to the horizon. But the rancher watched her closer now. He saw the quiet things, how she flinched at sudden sounds, how she touched the amulet under her collar when she thought he wasn't looking, how the lines around her mouth had deepened. One morning he found her outside, standing barefoot in the dirt. Her eyes were closed, arms loose at her sides, hair whipping in the wind. She looked almost like a statue carved out of some old grief. "What are you listening for?" he asked. She opened her eyes slowly. "Something that isn't there." Something, or someone? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked back to the house, muttering, "The air feels too empty, like it's waiting for something to fill it." That day they found tracks. Not human, not animal, long gouged impressions in the hard-packed earth, like claws made of bone and fire had dragged themselves across the land. The prints burned black into the ground. Nothing grew near them. Even flies wouldn't land. He crouched beside them, his face unreadable. "Tell me this isn't natural." She didn't lie. "It's not." "Is it what killed your husbands?" Her face went blank. Then she nodded once. "Yes, but I didn't know it then. I do now." He stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "Tell me everything." She waited, staring into the scorched tracks. "I thought it was just coincidence. Bad luck. I married good men. Honest men. But each of them touched something they shouldn't have. One disturbed a grave he didn't recognize. One hunted in the hills where no game ever stayed. The third, he opened a locked chest in the root cellar because he thought it might hold silver. What was in it? Bone. Wrapped in old cloth. My mother told me never to touch it." He didn't listen. Why keep it at all? She looked away. Because some things are safer sealed than destroyed. They didn't speak the rest of the ride back. The tracks led east toward the high ridge that cast a shadow over their land each evening. She watched it now with something between dread and determination. That night they lit every lamp. Shadows played tricks on the walls, stretching tall and thin, flickering when they shouldn't have moved at all. The rancher checked his revolver 3 times. She sharpened a rusted hunting knife that had belonged to her father. Neither of them said the word, afraid. But it hung between them like smoke. After midnight something howled. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't anything that should have had lungs. The sound split the air like old wood tearing apart. The horses kicked at their stalls. Chickens shrieked and fluttered until feathers filled the coop. He was out the door in seconds, shotgun in hand. She followed, her blade hidden under her coat. They stood in the yard, scanning the trees, the barn, the sky. Nothing moved, but they could feel it. A pressure. Like the air itself had thickened, like the land didn't want them standing there anymore. The hair on his arms stood straight. Her breath came shallow. "It's not coming yet," she whispered. He turned to her. "How do you know?" "Because if it were here, we'd already be dead." He didn't sleep. Sat by the window, watching the night pulse with silence. She stayed close, curling in the armchair, arms wrapped around her knees. They didn't touch, but they didn't drift far, like 2 embers in the same dying fire. The next morning, smoke rose from the neighboring homestead. They found the place gutted. Barn burned to the ground. No animals left. House torn apart from the inside, like something had searched for something and left fury in its wake. The family, parents, 3 children, gone. No blood. No sign of a fight. Just gone. The sheriff was already there, jaw clenched, eyes red. "What the hell am I looking at?" She walked slowly through the ruins, fingertips trailing along blackened beams. She crouched near the hearth, brushing away ash until she found a symbol, scratched deep into the stone, half melted from the heat. A spiral, surrounded by 5 notches. She paled. "I've seen this before," she said. The rancher stepped beside her. "Where?" "In my mother's book. It's a marker. A calling sign." "For what?" "For something that shouldn't answer." The sheriff overheard. "You saying this thing is summoned?" She stood. "I'm saying someone's making it bolder. Feeding it." His jaw worked. "You think it's someone in town?" "I think you need to decide how much truth you're willing to stomach." He looked ready to argue, then stopped. Turned away. I'll send a message to the capital. Ask for men. Guns. Too slow, she said. This thing's hunting now. It's not waiting. Back on the ranch, they began fortifying. Reinforced the doors. Blocked the cellar. Spread salt across the thresholds and tied iron nails above the windows. It wouldn't stop what was coming, but it might slow it down. That evening, as the sun bled over the ridge, he found her in the barn, whispering to a bundle wrapped in black cloth. "What is that?" he asked. She turned slowly. "The thing from the chest. I never threw it away." "Why keep something cursed?" "Because part of me believed it was tied to me. That if I destroyed it, I'd be next." He stared at her, silent. She looked back down at the bundle. "But I don't think that's true anymore. I think someone wanted me to believe that. So I'd protect it." He reached forward and gently touched her arm. "Then let's burn it." She hesitated. He nodded once. Together. They built the fire behind the barn. The wind fought it, but he kept feeding kindling while she unwrapped the bundle. Inside were shards of bone, yellowed and etched with tiny markings, words in a language neither of them could read. She dropped them into the flames one by one. They didn't scream. But the air changed. The smoke twisted violently, spiraling upward like it didn't want to rise. Then the fire roared bright, too bright, lighting up the land like daylight. The barn doors slammed open on their own. The horses went wild. And then, silence. They stood in the ash, breathing hard. Nothing left of the bones. Nothing left of the belief that she had to carry this alone. Later, back inside, she poured them both a drink. They sat across from each other, the table between them now a fragile bridge instead of a barrier. "I think it's been following the object," she said quietly. "That bundle." "Not me." He nodded. "Then we just cut the leash." She shook her head. "No. We burned the leash. But the dog's still loose." He raised his glass. "Then we hunt it before it finds a new master." For the first time since he'd arrived, she looked at him like a partner. Not a worker, not a risk, but a choice. The fire crackled low. The wind, for once, didn't moan. But somewhere out there, past the reach of lanterns and fences, something shifted. No longer following. Now searching. And this time it knew her name. The following morning arrived with no birdsong. The sun climbed the sky like it had forgotten how to shine, a dull yellow smear behind thick clouds. The light that did come through felt wrong, flat, almost oily. She stood at the edge of the porch, mug cradled in both hands, staring toward the east ridge where the fire had licked up the cursed bones the night before. The rancher joined her, silent as always, and leaned against the post beside her. "Feels like the land's holding its breath." She nodded. "Because it is." They didn't speak much after that. The silence between them had grown comfortable, full of things already understood. They spent the day checking the perimeter again. The salt lines were still intact, the horses skittish but eating. Everything seemed still. But by afternoon, the first real sign came. They found the sheriff's horse tied to the fence, riderless, its flanks trembling, eyes wide and rimmed with red. No blood. No wound. Just absence where a man should have been. On the saddle horn, a single black feather had been tied with a thread of human hair. The rancher yanked it free, his jaw tight. "They're not hiding anymore." "They don't need to," she said, reaching out to soothe the trembling horse. "They've marked this place. What comes next won't be subtle." That night, the rancher stayed inside. She sat at the kitchen table with a lantern burning low and her mother's journal laid open, pages marked with trembling ink. His boots were heavy on the wood floor, pacing slow behind her. "You think it's the same thing every time?" he asked finally. She didn't look up. "No. I think it wears different faces, but it's always born from the same hunger." He came closer, rested his hand on the back of her chair. "Why you? Why your family? My mother told me once, we're like a lantern in the dark. Some things can't help but draw close." She said the trick was learning how to keep the flame without burning everything else down. She turned a page. Her eyes landed on a sketch, rough charcoal lines showing a figure with hollow sockets for eyes and antlers made of smoke. "She called it the hollow," she said. "Said it came when sorrow piled too high in one place. Like rot in the soil." He studied the drawing. "You think that's what's out there?" "I think it doesn't matter what I call it. It's coming just the same." That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. They took turns watching the windows, listening for changes in the wind. Around midnight the air shifted. It got colder, but not the kind of cold that came from weather. It was the chill of something stepping close that didn't belong. Then came the scratching. Not loud. Not panicked. Just deliberate. One claw at a time, dragging across the outside of the house. It circled slowly. No howls. No knocking. Just that steady scrape like something marking its territory. He stood near the door with the shotgun gripped tight. She sat in the corner with the knife in her lap and her feet bare on the wood, eyes closed, whispering something in a language he didn't know. "What are you saying?" he asked, voice low. "Calling on my blood," she murmured. "On my mother. On every woman who kept the fire while the men died in the dirt." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse. They waited, long minutes with nothing but their breath and the ticking of the old clock to keep them company. Then suddenly the front window shattered. Not from something being thrown, but from pressure, like the glass had given up under the weight of being watched too long. The rancher fired once, buckshot blowing out into the darkness. Nothing. He stepped forward, scanning the black. But when he turned back to her, she was gone. He ran out onto the porch, frantic, calling her name. The wind ripped the words from his mouth. He didn't see her anywhere. Then he saw the footprints. Hers. Leading away from the house, straight toward the ridge. He followed without hesitation. She wasn't sleepwalking. She wasn't possessed. She was moving with purpose. He caught up to her near the tree line, where the moonlight had to fight to get through the leaves. "You're walking into its den," he said. She didn't stop. "I have to end it before it roots deeper. You said yourself it's stronger now." "I'm not trying to survive it," she said, voice firm. "I'm trying to end it." He reached out and grabbed her arm. "No. If this thing is drawn to you, then maybe that's the trap. But you don't spring it alone." She looked at him, really looked at him. Then she nodded. They went together. The ridge was steeper than it looked from the ranch. Gnarled trees clawed the air, their bark split in weeping sap that smelled like rot. At the summit there was a clearing. Nothing grew there. No grass, no trees, not even weeds. Just stone and dirt and silence. In the center stood a cairn, piled rocks, too even to be natural. Around it, symbols had been carved deep into the earth. The same ones from the homestead hearth. She stepped forward. "This is where it's tethered. This is its mouth." He kept the shotgun aimed. "So what now?" "I speak its name. I unbind it. And then we kill it." Before he could stop her, she stepped into the circle. The air dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The cairn split open with a sound like bones snapping underwater. And from it rose something too thin, too long, arms that bent the wrong way, a face that wasn't a face, a mouth that stretched without lips or sound. It moved like smoke and fire fused in bone. But its hunger was undeniable. The rancher fired. The blast hit nothing. The thing didn't even flinch. She raised her hands, palms out, chanting in that same broken, burning language. The creature paused, twitched. Then it shrieked, not a sound but a pressure like it was pushing against the inside of their skulls. The rancher dropped to his knees, blood running from his nose. She stepped closer to it, her voice rising, more forceful now, like she was forcing the words through centuries of silence. The creature shuddered. A crack appeared along its body, light spilling out, white and searing. It staggered. "Now!" she screamed. He pulled the second trigger. The shell was iron, blessed by her own blood earlier that day. He didn't know how, didn't question it. The shot struck center mass. The creature collapsed in on itself like paper set ablaze. No scream. Just a wind that tore through the trees and vanished. She fell. He caught her before she hit the ground. The ridge was quiet again. Too quiet. But not heavy anymore. Not poisoned. Back at the ranch, he cleaned her wounds. Sat beside her bed through the night. She didn't wake, but her breathing was even. Steady. Morning broke gold. Real gold. Outside the birds sang. And somewhere in the distance the land exhaled. The morning sun hit the porch with warmth that hadn't touched this land in years. It glinted off the tin roof, turned the dust in the yard into gold, and filled the house with a fragile kind of peace. The kind that made a man pause before breathing too deeply, afraid it might break. She stirred for the first time in hours, eyelids fluttering as if shaking off a nightmare she'd carried since childhood. The rancher sat beside her bed, boots off, shoulders slumped, and fingers wrapped loosely around the mug he'd forgotten to drink from. Her eyes opened slowly, and the first thing she saw was him. "Still here?" she murmured, voice hoarse. He smiled faintly. "I'm stubborn." "You followed me up that ridge," she said, like the fact had only just settled in. He leaned closer. "You didn't ask me to." "No," she whispered, "but I hoped you would." She pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing. The wound on her shoulder was clean, wrapped in fresh cloth and sealed with her own herbs. Her body felt hollowed out, but her mind, her soul, was clear. It's dead, she said. Gone, he confirmed. The land knows it. I can feel it. For a moment, neither of them moved. They sat there, the weight of survival settling quietly between them, heavier than any loss either had carried alone. But something had changed. It wasn't just that the creature was gone. It was that the lie was gone, the lie that she had to endure it all alone. She swung her legs off the bed and stood, legs shaking but firm. I need to see it, she said. With my own eyes. He helped her saddle up the mare she trusted most. The air had a sweetness to it now. Not flowers, nothing bloomed yet, but potential. Like the land had remembered how to breathe. The ridge didn't seem so high in the daylight. The trees still bore their scars, blackened bark and twisted roots, but birds flitted between branches again. And when they reached the clearing, the difference was undeniable. The cairn was gone. Not broken. Not scattered. Gone. The markings in the earth had faded, erased like bad memories. Grass had already begun to sprout in small patches, pale green against the black soil. She stepped into the center where the creature had burst into light. She expected something, an echo, a whisper, a leftover sting. But there was nothing. He watched her closely. She didn't weep. She didn't collapse. She just stood straighter than he'd ever seen her. Later that evening they sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip low. The sky flared with orange and lavender streaks. She sipped a glass of rye and he rolled a cigarette with the kind of care that made it feel like ritual. You're not cursed, he said finally. I never was, she replied, then added, but I believed I was, and belief can be worse than truth. People in town, they're still going to talk. I know, she said, taking another slow sip. Let them. Think you'll leave? She looked out across the land. It was still scarred, still weary. But it was hers. And it had chosen her as much as she had chosen it. No, she said. Not anymore. This is where I fight. Where I rebuild. He nodded. And you? She asked, turning to him. He took his time answering. I came here running. Thought this land would break me down to nothing. Thought if I died fixing fences in the middle of nowhere, I'd deserve it. And now? He looked at her. Now I think it brought me here to find something worth standing for. Their eyes locked. Not in romance, not in desperation, but in recognition. Two souls that had been torn raw by grief, stitched back together not with hope, but with grit. A week passed. Then two. The town began to change. No more missing animals. No strange smells in the wind. Children returned to playing in the streets, and the preacher no longer flinched when the church bell rang. Some people still avoided her. Crossed the street, muttered prayers. But others, ones who had lost something and never spoken of it, started to nod when they passed her by. Quiet nods, but respectful. Then the sheriff returned. He came alone, bruised, eyes hollow but alive. They sat at her table that night, the rancher and her on one side, the sheriff on the other, nursing whiskey and not saying much. Finally the sheriff spoke. There's another place, he said. Up north near Red Hollow. Strange disappearances. Same signs. She didn't answer. You're not the only one it touched, he continued. But you might be the only one who's ever fought it and lived. The rancher's jaw clenched. You asking her to leave again? After everything she? She held up a hand to stop him. What would you have me do? She asked the sheriff. Ride into towns and burn every demon hiding in the soil? He looked down at his glass. I'd have you rest. But I think we both know that's not who you are. Later, after the sheriff left, she sat in the barn, running her hands over the worn wood of her father's saddle. She didn't need to ride. Not yet. But part of her was already mapping the trail. The rancher stood at the door. You planning to go? I haven't decided, she said. But maybe I will. Someday. He walked over to her. Took her hands. Then I ride with you. She stared at him long and hard. You sure? I was sure the second I saw what you stood against, he said. I fought for cattle, money, land. None of it mattered. But this? You. That matters. They rode out together the next morning. Not away from the ranch. Not yet. Just a short ride to the boundary where the land rolled on and the horizon pulled like an unanswered question. They stopped at the ridge and looked back. The ranch still stood. Stronger now. No longer a place where men came to die, but one where a woman had faced death and spat in its face. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And in that moment, with the sun behind them, the wind in their faces, and the road ahead open and dangerous, the world didn't feel cursed anymore. It felt like it was finally listening.